Hello there, and welcome to TaAF Talks, the show all about influencing positive change and doing things differently. My name is Jamie Waugh, and alongside me, as ever, is the irrepressible, irreplaceable, some might say irrelevant, Ken Massey.
Hello. Hello,
How you doing, Ken?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. So, me and Ken, as you know, with some special guests along the way, are going to share some of our learning, some of our experiences, and hopefully have a bit of a giggle. So, let's get straight into today's podcast, Ken. What can we look forward to?
Okay, well, today is going to be all about creating fantastic events, whether that's staff meetings, whether that's events with the community, whether it's trying to work with partners or other organisations. We're going to talk all about how you make a really great event, and we may even cover some of those that have been not so good and what we've learned. And we've got a guest with us today.
Ooh, exciting.
Very exciting, and it's more exciting than even that.
Than usual. You're talking about different guests we've had who may have in the future are less excited.
But today we've got the world's only Professor of Design and Creative Exchange, currently based at the University of Lancaster, maybe moving on to pastures new in the future, at some point in the very distant future. Not very near. He might be, don't know. We could have given away a big secret there. He never said that.
Do you know something I don't know?
We've got Professor Leon Cruickshank. Welcome, and thanks for being with us. A little round of applause.
Yay!
Hi.
Welcome, Leon.
Pleasure to be here. I didn't know I was moving on, but you know,
Might be.
these things happen.
You never know.
And when you do give somebody an intro like that, you do sit there thinking, oh, why is he sat here with me and you?
That's true. That's true. But close friend of TaAF.
Yes.
And we've worked together before, so we're excited to share some of that stuff today.
Absolutely. I think we were really keen to. We've been lucky enough to work with Leon and his team on a journey that we're on, and we wanted to help others potentially by sharing some of the value that we've gained from that, from those who aren't lucky enough to perhaps work with the world's leading and only Professor of Design and Creative Exchange.
Yeah.
So I think we'd like to, Leon, which will be no surprise to you potentially, because this is something that you taught us to do in the first place, is talk a little bit around success factors. So at the start of a podcast, we would like to just ask a guest what it is that they would like to have achieved from today's podcast. And at the end, we can reflect on that and see if we managed to do it. So for you personally, what would you like to have achieved from today?
Good to have some fun.
Okay.
It'd be good to remember the TaAF journey that we've been on, because I think there were some quite interesting conversations right at the beginning, which to get for the three of us to reflect on that in a way that is light-hearted and maybe we can make fun of each other a bit. I think it would be good, and I think useful for listeners, because beginning bits are really difficult. TaAF is an amazing project, but the beginning wasn't the easiest. So I think pulling some of that out, that would be good.
Okay, I agree wholeheartedly with that. And a little baby is instantly nervous.
We're going to get excited.
This is Leon's been waiting for this. Come on, I'm going to get in there now. Perfect. So we'll reflect on that, and I think, so we'll reflect on that at the end. So I think one thing we'd like to do, Leon, if this is okay, and actually it's something I realised I very rudely had never really taken any time to get to know a little bit of your kind of journey of how you got to where you are now. So if it's okay, we'd like to talk on the first bit is a little bit around your story from humble beginnings to what you are now, which is an international superstar. I imagine, well, in your own mind.
No, still humble now. I'm going to start. So I'm the only Professor of Design and Creative Exchange. That means I design exchanges that create something new. And really, that notion of exchanging has always been with me. And So I started as a three-dimensional designer. So I did product design, I designed robots, I designed fiberglass furniture. We'll start with, I was really interested in exchanges and interactions. So I'll start with a bidet I designed. The bidet, you sat on a big pair of lips, sat on the lips, and the tongue comes up and does the bidet. I'm making a kind of come hither motion with my hands here.
What I'd say is you're making me quite uncomfortable. with those gestures. But carry on.
Yeah. So I want to explore new forms of interaction. And initially, the design for the bidet had a big lever on the side. And the further we pushed the lever down, the faster the tongue went. And in the end, I dropped that. So I was interested in interactions between designers and users, as I would say then, but I'd say people now. And I became increasingly interested in there being a real dialogue between those two.
And sorry to just jump in, as we will do
Please
for this
do,
podcast
yeah.
probably. And is that because you recognise or you saw something interesting in interaction that you thought, I want to understand this a bit more?
So it comes down to post-structuralist philosophy, which we're not going to get into too much today.
Well, Ken's done loads of reading over the weekend.
Safe to say, I don't even know what that means.
Okay, let's carry on.
A branch of philosophy that values people and things that are traditionally not valued, and seeks to challenge the kind of natural hierarchies. So post-structuralist philosophy is about trying to dissolve those binaries where, a teacher knows more than the student, or the council member or someone in the council knows more than the people who live in their environment. And it isn't just about ground up, turning that upside down and saying the people with the lived experience should be in charge, because that's just as difficult, really. It's about there being a real dialogue between designers and people who use their products, or people in the council and the people they speak for, or people who run charities and people who are the recipient of charitable works. So it's about dissolving those kind of power structures where it's natural for someone to be in charge. And my whole academic career has been exploring what happens when you dissolve those kind of hierarchical structures, and there's a real dialogue. And that led to lots of design work. So my PhD was about how designers and citizens can have a dialogue, and made lots of designs. Instead of do you know the James Bond film where he's, I think it's Never Say Die, no, Never Say Never, where he sits in a low chair and he's being interviewed in a high chair with screens looking at him, and they're kind of X-raying him, and they see he's got a gun and all that stuff.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm going to let you down now with my James Bond knowledge.
Sounds good though.
So instead of having a big desk with a big chair as the executive and a small desk that you sit in and you feel small, I designed the mound. And you would kind of lounge on the mound. It was like, come and lounge on my mound. That's crazy now. But anyway, but it was about breaking down power relationships.
Okay. And I think important to, perhaps for listeners, one thing that I've always wondered, and when you talk about designers, we're talking about people who design things and products, but also people who design systems and processes and organisations.
And interactions and events.
And anything.
Absolutely.
Just people who make anything either tangible or intangible.
Yeah. So that idea of there not being an environment where someone's naturally in charge. So you sitting in circles rather than sitting in ranks with someone at the front at a lectern. That is, so it has the basis in philosophy, and it has the basis in some really weird design work, but there's a direct, thick line from that to the work we did in TaAF, which is about having a real dialogue and getting people to make the best contribution they can make. And so for me, it really is the philosophy and the weird design are absolutely critically important to what I do. But the stuff I do, I don't really talk about Heidegger and Foucault and those sorts of people. I still write about them. So I have this weird life where I write academic papers, and they're sometimes quite theoretical. I've written a book on open design that's quite theoretical. No pictures, no illustrations, no tables, no bullet points. It's
not
just
for Jamie.
hardcore.
I need a pop-up book version.
Yeah. So I write theoretical papers and a book and that sort of thing. But I also work lots with people like yourselves, libraries, all sorts of things. And I really enjoy having those two worlds and moving between them. I think it's really powerful for both things, but it does feel like you have two jobs sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
And I think what's super interesting, well, all of this is super interesting, but I think we've never had this kind of chat before about your kind of background and the things that you found a lot of your approach in. But as you were describing, what was it, sorry, the post-structuralist,
Yeah.
whatever the last word was?
Philosophy,
thank you. As you were describing it, I was like, that's kind of what we're trying to do in TaAF, and it's kind of the stuff we've been working with you on. And we've never used that language at any point. And it's quite exciting to know that's what we've been doing, because now we can use that language and look super intelligent with other people.
Only if you can remember what it is, though.
Yeah, a post, a sticker of something. I couldn't quite remember it. But I think everything you described there it's really interesting to know that that's what you've been helping us with, without framing it in that way.
Yeah.
And actually sit there and you think, that is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to break down this kind of the boundary that exists, but not flip it. Actually, everybody has a voice in this discussion, and everyone's valid ideas and opinions are valid and worthwhile to be involved.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is interesting that I think what's interesting for me is, Leon, that we worked together for maybe 12 or 18 months now, maybe more, and you've been working with us, I guess, on some of our ideas and almost at our level, and the fact that it's grounded in some academic thinking has not really been relevant to us necessarily, and we've not talked about this before, but nice to know that there is some method behind the madness, so to speak. Before we move on, I'm really just interested to explore with you just for a second, if we can. So that's really interesting to hear kind of the theoretical growth, but I'm interested to just touch. Over the last couple of years, you've mentioned that you've been to done stuff with the EU, or just give us two or three of the most exciting places you've been and work that you've done in a little summary.
So so before I was at Lancaster, I was at Brunel University, and I was there for 6 years, and that was really hard work. Loads of international students, and then I came to Lancaster. And I was one of the first people that was employed in a research lab called Imagination Lancaster. And there was nothing. There was we had a desk. I had a desk and an office, and that was it. There were no design courses. There was no design. And that's when I moved into thinking about how to help other people be more innovative. And the exciting time was something that still makes me clench a bit. It was my first workshop I'd really run. And it was with high-tech SME owner-managers in Daresbury Science Innovation Campus. And I was just about to go on and do this thing about personas, about how your customers, if your customer was a person, what would they be like, and how would they talk to you? And there was someone from the management school there, and her final words before she introduced me to these 40 owner-managers, she said, "Oh, I'm a bit worried. I don't think this is going to work." And then she went on. So that was, and it was brilliant. Actually, it worked really, really well. So that was exciting. So I've done work across Europe. I work a lot in close relationship to Dutch Design Week. Dutch Design Week, 2nd or 3rd week of October, and it's a bit like the Edinburgh Festival, but for design. It's amazing. The population of Eindhoven, where Dutch Design Week is, quadruples, and it is the most amazing experience. If you ever get a chance to go, you should
book it.
You should go.
Book it. TaAF road trip.
That would be good. With a podcast, it'd be an excuse.
Oh, yes, brilliant.
If you're looking for kind of socially aware designers or social innovation or ideas around that, it would be a great place. It would be a great place to go. So that's been fun, and I've really enjoyed that. I have also did some work in Uzbekistan for the UN.
Wow!
And that was a real weird experience. Really great. Really difficult to run a session when no one speaks English in the room. I was told that everyone would speak English. So no one spoke English, and there was an interpreter. And I would say something, and then the interpreter would say that. So my style is quite flowing, and I like to make jokes, and it's like wordplay. No jokes allowed. And so
I've heard your jokes, Leon, so that's probably a good thing.
Pretty good. But I was also, the UN approached me to say, I want you to talk about design thinking and service design. And I don't really think design thinking or service design exist.
Okay.
I don't think they're really things. But you're not going to say no to the UN. So I invented open design thinking as a new discipline, which draws on a little bit of design thinking, but also my approach is all about openness. So my book is on open design, and it's about being open to other people's ideas, and they're not being an authority saying this is how you should think, which a lot of design thinking is. It's like, I'll tell you how to think like a designer and you'll be creative. And it's like, oh, no, you won't. It'll be rubbish. So I invented open design thinking in Uzbekistan, and I came back. My flight was delayed, and I came straight to the big TaAF event.
Oh, yes.
And so we did a big TaAF event. Hopefully we'll talk about it soon. And it was one of those events where it was a good idea that we did it twice. But God, by the second time, flying straight back from Uzbekistan, I was sort of hallucinating towards the end. It was
twice
really
in the
weird.
same day, yes.
Yeah, twice.
Full on intense, yeah.
So I've been lucky. I've been to Seoul to talk to them about co-design. I've been to San Francisco. I've been really lucky in seeing some of the world and just seeing how other people do it around the world. It's really fascinating how they approach engagement, or co-design, or participatory design, or co-working. Lots of different words for it.
Amazing. Brilliant. I mean, I've never heard that stuff from you before. That's really, really cool. So what we'd like to do now is get into what today's topic is. And me and Kenneth talked about this, and one of the things we felt would be a really good topic to share with listeners, because more and more people are getting into this world and potentially need some help with that, and that's in how you deliver, and by deliver we mean the entirety of what that involves, a really engaging and memorable event or interaction. And I think, I work in the NHS, Ken works in kind of ledger trusts and involved in a lot of local authority work. And I think more and more public sector government bodies are moving towards the idea of collaboration, involvement, co-design, breaking down the barriers that you talked about, Leon. And often what you then need to do is be able to design a really great first interaction so that people really understand what you're trying to do and you can hook them to want to come and be part of that. And from a personal point of view, I think, at least from my own experience, I think that's where a lot of people can struggle, because we all want to move into this world but don't necessarily have the skills and experiences or sometimes the confidence to step into that world of bringing people together and giving them something engaging and memorable. So I think what we'd like to talk with today is how you do that. And I mean how you, but we mean the collective you, which I don't think is a term, but how can we do that, and how can we really break that down into the functions of how you would approach that. So we're going to talk a little bit around preparation, and I know from our early interactions, vital the prep is there. Delivery on the day, which everybody likes to jump straight into because that's the quite interesting, exciting bit, and then what you do after you've delivered an amazing event. So I think if we start with the preparation and just talk a little bit around your approach to that, the importance in your mind of that, and we'll talk about our personal experiences that we do as well, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So if I just had one piece of advice about preparation, this is something it's so great you've picked up on, is how will you know if it's gone well? What are the success criteria? Because without that, you can do an event and you won't know whether it's gone well. And that can shape what you want to do. If that's your target, that you want 1,000 ideas, or you want consensus on how these resources should be deployed, or whatever it is, if you know where the stopping point is, then you can think about a set of interactions or a set of activities that will get you there. If you don't know that end point, it doesn't really matter how great it is, you're probably going to end up with something unfocused at the end. So knowing that right at the beginning is really helpful in shaping your discussions and the development of your activities.
So and I think one thing, I'll come back to my own personal experience of where me and you were sat in a room, and that was the first time where it twigged for me a little bit at that point. Well, let's start with that actually, and then I'll talk about where I now kind of approach this. So we were sat in a room in Blackburn, and we had our DWP partners in the room because we're doing some really, really exciting work now with them. And this was one of the very early kind of interactions that we had. So it was about how we talked about hooking them, engaging to do something. And I'd put prep, because I'm quite a planner, into all this session. And I'd asked Leon to come and join and just support and not lead it, but just kind of be there to help it. And I set off into this session, which in my mind was the right session. And Leon, to his credit, because you could just sit in the background and be quiet about things, but that doesn't help improve things, said, I think we've missed something here, because we haven't actually really started about how do we know that this session here has been successful. And actually, let's go around the room first and allow everybody to state what their success would be from this. And actually, so that was fundamental firstly, and since then I've never not done that, because once you've been kind of in a room and then gone, oops, yeah, a little bit, and Leon in a nice way has reminded you that we should do that, it's almost like not being told off, but you'll make sure that you don't make that same kind of mistake again. And I think what was equally important about that is when you said talk about what your success factors are, I know that you don't just mean for you as the
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah.
What you mean is, what are the success factors for the people who you're asking to come to that interaction or that session? Think about what success for them would be in the planning, as well as success for you, as well as success potentially for, whatever it would be, the organisation or what you're trying to do. So it's not just an individual success or your own organisations, it's success for that event with the people who are coming there. And putting that thought into what they could and should get from it means you design something much more open and involving than I'm setting an agenda based on a thing that I want to achieve and you'll be invited, which I think is what a lot of what can tend to happen in the public sector.
I think it's a bit of a... I love what you said then. I think it's a bit of a lesson for life, this sense of beginning with the end in mind, and not just in our planning of meetings, but in everything we're doing when we're working with places and organisations, and even in our own personal lives to a degree. Beginning with that, I'm starting today, I'm beginning, but I've got to have the end in mind, those outcomes, that sense of success. And just what you said, Jamie, as well, totally agree that I think we go to so many events where the organisation has planned what success looks like for them, and as a participant it's dangerous. You can almost feel the sense of being used. I've been for a day and I've just been used for your purposes, which then doesn't lead to any kind of ongoing relationship.
And I think that's the key point, isn't it? That might work once and you might give of your best for that day, but you're less likely to go to the next thing that they arrange and involve you, and actually sustainable collaborations in the future. That hook needs to be there throughout, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take on board that everyone is really making a good contribution, why wouldn't you think about their motivations? Why wouldn't you think about their what they get out of it? And particularly if you're planning a series of events or you're planning a longer term engagement, people will give you some juice, if you like, out of goodwill once, but actually you need to be speaking to them. They need to get something tangible from it. Without that, it's really difficult to have a good, strong relationship with people, because everyone needs something for their base. Everyone needs something that really speaks to their motivation. And we ran a project in Lancaster called Beyond the Castle, and we did a co-design project with 2,000 people. The only way we could do that is with having, so we had 15 volunteers who really worked for us, and we tailored what they did to meet their motivations. One person wanted to, she wanted her CV to look better on the design side of things, so we gave her design jobs to do, and now she's working as a researcher. Someone else was new to the area, and they wanted to meet new people, so they were in charge of connecting. We stopped funding this project 7 years ago now, and that community is still working. It's still functioning. People have moved on, but we built a really robust community because everyone felt like they were getting something out of it, and it wasn't all about us. we were the least important people in the room, and that's the way we wanted it, because actually they were important because they're the communities, they were doing stuff we could help, we had a bit of money, we had a bit of inspiration we could bring, but it was about starting them off. And that's always stuck with me, that you do the, we had a little mantra, the paid people get the least interesting jobs to do, because other people are volunteering, so they should do what they want to do, as long as they're doing it well.
Yeah. So I'm mindful we've got loads we want to squeeze out today, so I think it would be good to try and just leave people with a couple of really big ones. So I think the success factors is a really kind of big one. And correct me if you don't feel that this is one of the big ones as well, but perhaps we get into this, is because something that you've kind of again helped us with is put in the prepping to know what happens after the event. So even though you haven't even necessarily started designing what you're going to do with these people on the day, know beforehand what you want the thing after that to be, with a view to then you can let them know what you're asking them to be committed to going forwards, as opposed to it be an email after an event that says, great, it would be great for you all to come back in 2-3 weeks time or whatever it would be. So I think, do you agree that that's one of the kind of fundamental things of knowing what you want to do?
Yeah, and I think it's useful to think about the designing the interaction. That design work starts before people arrive. It's about how people are prepared. It's about who you're inviting, how you're inviting them. Are you asking them to do something? So the event, which might be a day or whatever, most of the preparation work before that will determine whether it's a success or not. So you need to prepare people. Then you need to work intensively with them, or in a relaxed way, but you work with them, and you should absolutely think of what happens after that as part of the design, as part of it. And you might say to someone, okay, James or Debbie or whoever, your job is to make sure that after the event runs perfectly. And you can be involved, but keep some energy, because you need to pick the ball up and make sure that the events we've planned, the activities we've planned after the main event happen. And that could be, we did an event for the Treasury in London, and we created a report, really nicely designed report, that was sent to them within 90 minutes of the end of the workshop. Wow. So we had someone taking photos, obviously, we had someone writing copy, and it was combined, and then it was sent to them. So by the time they got back to their desks and had a chat, what did you do? The report was there. And that went to the chief scientific officer, it went to really senior people across Whitehall. And we did that because we wanted to build momentum, and we knew it needed to be timely. So that, after what happens, is really, really important.
Just I think really kind of, because people's energy and enthusiasm is there in the event and generally for a little bit after, and wanes day by day by day. And I think I've never really kind of thought about potentially deliberately designing some of the interactions, or designing how you capture it on the day, so that could we share something within 2 hours of this, to say to them, even if it's a photograph of the sheet that you had up where people voted on, or the slide or image on the screen that people's kind of views were on, just capturing some of that, even if it's not the granularity of detail, to share back and say, thank you so much, really quick acknowledgement of their contribution, here's something to be shared, and look forward to hearing from us again. It's a really, like I said, whilst they're still engaged in that mindset, that seems like an awesome approach.
And I think this is one of the things, when I look back to the first event we did with you, Leon, in terms of the TaAF Big Partner launch event to a degree, I think this is one of the things that on that day we got lots of stuff right, but I think this element of what next and how does the momentum build, we didn't quite get right. When I say quite get right, we got quite wrong. Yeah. And I don't know what your views and opinion, where you felt that went at that time.
Yeah, I think we were getting to know each other, I think, and we were at the beginning of this. There were some sharp questions from the TaAF side. What are you actually going to do in this launch event? And does it really need the resource, human resource and physical resource that we were asking for? And we made the case, and it was really great that you trusted us, actually, because it was really very different to you. So I don't think this isn't about criticism in any way, and it's not about blame. It was about the stars aligning and about the beginningness of something new.
You've already hurt my feelings though by just saying the word criticism, so it's all right. Carry on.
Yeah, we talked about a program of events, and the aim of the big event, and I think in total it was like 120 people or something like that. It was to allow people to form clusters to collaborate on ideas for making people more active, and to explore the notion that those wouldn't necessarily be geographically based. They could be based around other things, and really to be open for what that could be and let that emerge. And we came up with some clusters that were interesting. Some of them were physical based, geographically bounded. Some of them not. Before that event, we were pushing a bit for there to be a date for the next event, and for there to be something to announce. We had a bit of a scrap because I think there was a desire to not announce how much money there was, and there wasn't another date. There was, we'll do something after Christmas, and we knew that there was a lot of goodwill and there was a lot of momentum. And the idea was that these groups would come, they would be facilitated to come together as groups, and then they would all come together as a big group and talk about the progress they've made. And everyone was exhausted after the event because it was really great, but it was pretty full on. And that follow-up event didn't happen. And the follow-up with the groups that had formed didn't happen. And it was you get people excited, and if you don't give them something to spend that excitement on, then it goes a bit stale and they get a bit disillusioned. So I think we did great work in the launch, but it wasn't really capitalised on.
And I agree wholeheartedly. And again, I've actually hindsight's a wonderful thing, but actually there was this bit in mind at this time is I think there was a little bit of, pressure's probably the wrong word, but a little bit of thought from whether it be various members in the team or various people in Sport England that we should do something visible. So, because we weren't really planning on a kind of a big launch event initially, because we were almost trying to work out what it is that we were trying to do. But there was this kind of encouragement and push of people don't know what's going on, and that's a frustration for people, so maybe we should do something quite kind of big. And I think, so what we ended up doing then was, through our work with you, designing what that kind of could and should have been. And this doesn't excuse the fact that we hadn't done the follow-on stuff really, we kind of didn't manage people's expectation properly. But I think it's also that bit of hindsight suggests we probably didn't really know the direction we were trying to go to when we kind of had this launch event at that time. And actually, would we have ever wanted to do a huge launch event for 120 different partners if we'd have known what we know 12 months later? Which is actually quite a different approach and mindset to how we're trying to approach that.
I think this is one of the really interesting things perhaps to draw out in this discussion and to learn from, certainly for us, was this sense of doing an event just because the timing is right for an event. If it's not the right time for the project and you've not got the other milestones mapped out, or you've not built the right sense of capital in the communities you're trying to work with, or you've not got your insight right, actually it's making sure that everything is lined up properly so that you can flow from one stage to the next. I think that's what happened with TaAF in that launch event, is we wanted to do the event and we wanted to move on to other things after the event, but we weren't ready to do some of that stuff for a variety of reasons. But I think that's a good learning point to think about if you're organising events, meetings, collaborations, seminars, the timing of it, in not only the timing of what day and time and where, but the timing in terms of the linear programme of the project is really important.
Yeah. Also how you fit within the larger landscape, and that, so it could have been that Sport England weren't really ready, or Sport England were placing demands on you which meant you didn't have time to commit to those emergent groups. So in one reality, you could have imagined there were 6 or 8 groups that came out of that, some of them geographical, some of them not. And really I think it was a year before the groups really were activated. So in one reality, you could have spent a year activating those groups and getting them amazing and getting them really, trained up and doing stuff. But it wasn't the reality that you were living in.
No.
There were other things which meant that wasn't going to happen. And TaAF is brilliant. So it's not a problem. But that notion of that learning and learning about whether it's right in the bigger scheme of things, as well as the kind of the people, the visible people have a kind of demands, and people want, if you have a good event, people want another one in a week, and it's like, well, it took us a month to develop it. So, but there's also those bigger power structures that you need to be aware of, and I think sometimes be confident. And everyone was out of their comfort zone, but I think the thing about my research group is that we're used to being outside of our comfort zone, so we're a bit more comfortable about being uncertain, and we just pretend we're certain. And I think TaAF has got to a great place, and there's been loads of learning, so it's all good.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I think there was some things that came out of that event that, whilst maybe not those bigger outcomes of the kind of group stuff that you talked about, the notion that we're now founding everything on, which is we've already got loads of great stuff happening, so let's not commit to putting some brand new stuff on, was formed from one of those activities. The networking and connections that some people made there have turned into things that aren't necessarily our thing, but that doesn't matter, because a lot of people have never had that environment with those people before. And a lot of it has shaped how we approach the design of events and interactions going forwards.
Yeah.
I think it's worth just perhaps wrapping this little bit up and moving on to the second half. But I think just in summary, so a few takeaway points. Think about your success factors for everyone involved. Think about how you're going to invite people, what they should do to prepare to come to the event. These are just some of the things I think we've talked about. Thinking about what happens afterwards and where you're going to build momentum, and how it fits in terms of timing and positioning in the landscape. Those are all things to think about in the preparation phase, as well as then what you're going to do on the day.
Just one more thing. Think about what your participants are getting out of this. What benefits are they getting?
Which I know from experience, the chats that we've had, that's usually the harder one. So if you can't directly access the participants to find out what they would want, which is often the case if you're trying to involve members of the public or whatever, that's usually quite a hard one to get your head around, but it's a really good practice to do.
Yeah.
Because actually, no. Well, if you can't prove to yourself what the value is for them coming, then maybe don't put the event on until you've worked that out a little bit. Brilliant.
Okay, what we're going to do next, little interlude. And one of the things we're hoping to do in our podcast moving forwards is to just learn a bit more about our guests in like a quick fire penine. We're calling them penine quick fire questions. So we're going to start.
No, Ken, you didn't emphasise it. Penine.
Yeah, there's going to be 9 of them.
9 questions.
Yeah, it's genius, isn't it?
Come on, Ken. Come on.
To put you under a bit more pressure, we're going to have a timer.
Ooh.
So we're aiming to go fast. The rules are that if you say something either hilarious or interesting or outrageous, we've got the opportunity to stop the clock and quiz you about it. Okay. So, are you ready?
Yep.
Oh, hang on. Your phone's just gone off. Nightmare situation. Okay, here we go.
Leon, what's your nickname?
Closest I've ever had is Crookie when I played rugby.
Okay. Which Harry Potter character are you most like?
Probably Ron Weasley, although I'm not a scholar of Harry Potter.
Fair enough.
I'm going to pause this really, really, really quickly, just because, to be fair, I think your name sounds like you already are a Harry Potter character. Professor Leon Cruickshank. Professor Cruickshank is already a Harry Potter character in my mind.
Yeah.
I had to just say that, sorry.
So I would be the weird professor who was... so I came up for the cocktail for Christmas. So Bailey, it's called a hot cough, Bailey's and a mulled Calpol.
Okay, moving on.
One thing that annoys you.
Me being late.
And one thing that makes you happy.
Beautiful things. And it could be like this pen is, I think this pen is beautiful. I don't really care whether other people think it's beautiful. It gives me pleasure every time I look at it. So I try and fill my life with things that give me pleasure.
Gorgeous.
How long does it take to get ready?
About 7 minutes.
Specifically 7. I love the about. Specifically 7 minutes.
Run, walk, cycle, or something else?
Cycle.
Qualifications or experience?
Both or either.
Okay, very diplomatic. If there's a spider in your house, do you kill it or set it free?
Oh, I set it free.
Oh, sorry.
Set it free. That's different from what you said earlier,
Yeah,
Leon.
I did say I would eat it. I didn't feel like I could say that because spiders are delicious.
And number 9, how would you rate your karaoke skills on a scale of 1 to Mariah Carey?
I've never done karaoke, but I think I would go for it, and I would be pretty Mariah Carey-ish.
I love the confidence.
I've got a freakishly high voice. 'Cause I'm a big guy, but I've got a really natural singing voice. It's very high, so it would be amusing as well.
Note to self: arrange a TaAF and Lancaster Imagination karaoke sesh.
Yeah,
Love it.
Count me in.
What would be a song if you decided to do karaoke?
I'm not sure, but there's a half a song that I sing that is it's for the wings of a dove. So I might expand on that a bit.
Yeah, I love that.
I love the fact you committed to the high voice as well. Perfect.
We've got one last question that's not part of the pen and quick fire because we're not allowed to ask it to our guests. That's what our producers told us.
Apparently it makes them uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
But the final question is Jamie or Ken?
Can I not have both? That would be fun.
Greedy.
Fair enough.
I like that because you could have said neither.
Think of the combinations.
So we'll take both instead of neither. That's perfect. That is the best answer we've ever had so far. Perfect. So that was just a little bit of fun to get to know Leon a little bit better. So what we'd like to do now, and try and rattle through this as much as we can, but still getting loads of great valuable content out of it, is talk a little bit around. So now we assume that we've prepped. We've done the best prep we could have done for that day. We've done as much as we could to make sure it's going to be successful. And now it's the day of the event. And it's all about what are the main things we need to have in mind, to be aware of, to make sure we do on that day to absolutely smash that session. And one of the things I'd like to start off with, Leon, quite specifically, is what do you think are the ingredients for a great first hour of an event?
So something that we always do, and this is based on good research, is once someone has said something, they're much more likely to say more things. So, and if someone sits at the back and they don't say anything, the chances are they will sit the whole session. So finding a way to get people to say something is will make the rest of the session much livelier. So if you've got 30 people, there are ways where you can very briefly introduce yourself. If you give them a free introduction, people tend to go slightly longer than the person before them. So that's something to be aware of. So we have specific techniques where you constrain how much people talk. So we might ask people to say 5 words about themselves, but they've got 5 seconds. So getting people to talk is really important right at the beginning. If you've got a larger number of people, they might need to talk to each other in small groups and report back, and you can do that. So think about the interaction, get everyone moving, doing stuff. Don't leave people in their seats for more than 30 or 40 minutes. Move them around because they'll get bored. If this is something where where people are arriving with strong views, we try and allow people to express those views so that they can get beyond them. So we might do something like, if you've got if you know the answer to this, if it's obvious, write it on a bit of paper, put it into an envelope, and then we might stick it on the wall. So it's visible, but it's not dominating, and that person can know that their idea is recorded, and then they find it much easier to move beyond it. So it's kind of getting them to leave their baggage behind, getting them talking, getting them into a mindset where they can be open to other people's ideas and exchanges. And if you can do that in the first hour, then you're in a good place.
And I think, so there's probably a few things you pulled out there, and one thing I believe quite strongly, and you know, Leon and Ken know this about me, is I'm quite a high energy person, and that can bring its own challenges if you're trying to facilitate me in a session, but generally if you can harness it, you can use it for good. But what I'll often find is that, and I've had experience of this at multiple, quite a lot of events, is an introductory presentation can kill the energy in a room. So the amount of times I've seen people, there's a buzz, there's a hubbub, because there naturally is when people come and see each other and connect and have a coffee and things. And then what certainly the public sector likes to do, and I've seen colleagues such as Sport England do as well, is insist on doing a presentation from the front. And generally that's PowerPoint, which in itself is, you know, kind of a little bit kind of traditional.
Or upgrade into like a keynote.
Yeah, but usually the main challenge is 5 minutes in, you're still listening to the introduction presentation, and then 10 minutes in, you're still listening. And I can, for my personal energy levels dip if I'm having to listen to somebody for more than 5 minutes. So firstly, it suggests maybe they didn't prepare well enough to share people beforehand. This is what you come into. The fact you shouldn't really have to do that kind of presentation. I know that you guys don't really do that type of presentation when we do sessions. You'll do intros, you'll say hello, you'll get people interacting, and then throughout the day we'll talk about the content we're going to do. So I think, for me, an introductory presentation, if you have to do one, is vital, that it's short and snappy and moves as quickly as it can into other people contributing and getting involved.
Absolutely agree with that.
Because I was speaking to Alison about something I saw, and I don't know if this is real, but for me, when you sit people down and you can stand at the back of the room and watch somebody talk from the front, and I think you can visibly see where people start to switch off. There's a visible shuffle that's almost usually within the same minute or two of everybody in the room, and it's usually 6-7 minutes in, and you can see at that point you start to lose people here. There's a visible kind of a thing to it. So I think that one's key, and which is what you talked about, get people involved from the start, introductory, really, really early. Don't worry about getting your point across ad nauseum, because it shouldn't be about you and what you're trying to say. It's about them and what they're trying, well, all of us, and what we're trying to contribute. So I think that's an absolute key one. And another one, so I think you hinted at it a little bit, is creating an environment that maintains energy, enthusiasm, and encourages input. And I know, as you said there, one thing that you like to do is, because me and Ken are always keen to ask you, is there a hard and fast rule at what time do you have a brew? Or what time do you get people up? And that kind of thing.
So one thing we do, and this comes from experience, but I absolutely believe it, the pitch of conversation changes between conversation that's on topic and chit-chat. And you hear it, and you think, yeah, people are done. And they don't, it isn't like they haven't moved, they haven't done anything, but it's that, so what are you up to then? Are we finished? The pitch of the overall hubbub changes, and that's the point where you change. And it comes from experience, but I think if you listen for it, you would, your experience to hear enough to hear it. You've done lots of events, and it's just that's what I use. And forget the timing. If people are ready to move on and start to get bored, then move them on. And because you can have more time for discussion or whatever. So I think you have a plan, but really trying to tune into your participants. And individuals might be having problems, and have someone there who can step in and help individuals. Some people might arrive late. You don't want them to feel excluded, but you don't want to stop everything for them. So having someone who's like a backstop to work with individuals who are somehow disconnected is useful, but also thinking about that, plans to have people move around, but also be flexible and really try and empathise with your participants. How are they feeling it? Did they not? If something's not working, change it. A stupid thing that we do is when we make materials, we only ever work on one side. We only have print on one side. And this isn't because we don't like polar bears and we want to use the maximum amount of paper. It's because you can always say, all right, let's scrap this. Let's just turn it over. Let's do this instead. And you've got some white paper. People can do their own thing. So you really can respond to them.
I think, so I love the notion of that, I love the idea of that. It obviously takes some bravery to accept that, you know what I mean? Maybe this doesn't go exactly the way I wanted to, but maybe that's absolutely fine. Because people who are more engaged and motivated are going to offer me something better than people who I carried on fastidiously going through this activity that half an hour switched off and have probably offered nothing of value to no fault of their own for the last 30 minutes. Thinking a little bit around the events that me and you have discussed recently, where you're given an hour or 30 minutes to go away as a group and discuss one topic, and you kind of left out there separated from the facilitation and the lead of it, and really, really quickly, as you say, you get to that point where you're like, we're done now. We've got another 20 or 30 minutes of this. And actually, there's a role of facilitator maybe calling that out, but maybe there's a role for participants in calling that out as well.
I think there's something around, we've talked a lot about planning and this sense of planning, and then there's the willingness to move away from the plan, which I think the planning gives you confidence to do that. And you've talked before about, Leon, about plan Bs and plan Cs and plan Ds and what will happen if we want to change this. But I think, the other thing that's really important that we've mentioned is in terms of, if we're really trying to get something for ourselves, then we want to stick to our plan. I really want to get through this. I really want to get to the end. But if our motivation is a collective us, where are we trying to get to? What are we trying to get out of a certain thing? It may be that one thing takes us on a whole different direction of the event than we planned in the first place, and that could be really great. So I think it's that commitment as you do something about, breaking down those systems and power structures and having a perspective of the collective whole, and that confidence to change plan. But you're right, we've been to quite a few events where, go and discuss this topic for an hour and you've got 60 minutes and don't come back early and don't come back late, and you go to the group, and we've called it the group lottery. When you go to an event and you end up in a group and you didn't win the lottery, and no one wants to speak.
Yeah,
I'm going to do this for another 59 minutes and 30 seconds. And because you're not got that ability to be flexible, that can be really de-energising, and people go off on their phone and they're emailing, and we're just waiting for that hour to pass. It's a bit of a disaster.
Yeah. The other thing you can do with tasks is make the ending a little bit open-ended, so that if you have a really good group, they can do more work, they can take ideas further, they can, expand their imagination. If you can do that in such a way that, an average group can do something and they can feel good about it, but the great group can go beyond that in the same time. And it comes back to fundamentally designing something that allows people to make the best possible contribution they can make. Not everyone is a genius, or not everyone is a genius at this subject. Yeah. They'll be a genius at something else. So designing in activities that have that kind of extra step that is, you may not need to deploy if everyone's at the same level, but you give people somewhere else to go in that time frame, so they never feel like they're drumming their fingers waiting.
Yeah. And I think, jumping really quickly back to that kind of prep bit, one of the kind of approaches that we take now for our work with you is, when we're talking about our prep, we're separated into who are the people, what's the environment, and what are the logistics of it. And that people bit. So who are these people? What are they coming to contribute? What are their backgrounds? What are they working on? And use that in your design of an activity. So as you say, you don't design something that fundamentally is something they would struggle to connect to, or actually don't have that much of a kind of input on. So a couple of little bits, I think, before, because mindful, we could literally talk for hours and hours about some of this stuff. I think we might leave some of the creativity aspects for a different time, because that's one thing we're really, really excited and interested by, but I think it's probably a topic in its own right, potentially. A couple of things I'd really like to get a really quick kind of view on. So the first one I'll ask is a nice one. Post-lunch, how do you get people past that? You brought them back, they've had a big lunch, they've already contributed for 3 hours. Energy levels?
One thing I would do is invite people to come for a little walk around the block with me. And Lancaster University is great because we've got a woodland trail that goes around the very edge. So you can do a quarter of that in 10 minutes, maybe slightly more than 10 minutes. But that walking and breathing, getting some oxygen, it's good if you can get people out of the space you're in. So if you have lunch where you are, everyone's breathing, the carbon dioxide levels are going up, no one's going to pass out, but equally it isn't fresh. So getting them out of that room, even if it's next door for lunch and coming back, will help. Give them, when they come back, whether you can take them out for a walk or not, give them a little map of what we're going to do, and then getting them moving around, getting them standing up. That helps to, get the digestion going. Maybe put them into different groups so they've got to meet new people. So that, like, variety, I suppose, is good post-lunch.
I think it's a fab one because it's very rare that you get rotated to meet different people in training. And it's funny because everybody can have that initial, sit somewhere new with some new people, but actually it's always a good thing. It's never something you wish had never kind of happened, and I don't think it happens often enough.
And that, you double your chances on the group lottery.
The group lottery, yeah. And one thing you just thought, I've never thought about the term fresh air until you literally described we've been sharing the same air now for quite some time, and it's not as fresh as the air outside. You know what I mean? Yeah. When you say step outside for fresh air, I've never actually thought about it as being fresh. The levels are much better out there than in here. Yeah. And
over lunch, you could open the windows, even if it's cold, to get some fresh air in, and then you close them again. Yeah.
And encourage a bit of whinging as well. Oh, it's a bit cold. Good, yeah. Getting you engaged in something. Come on.
You would spot the southerner.
And one really, really quick one before we move on to a little bit of the kind of post-event is, should people be afraid of asking people to do something different? Whether or not they be elected members, politicians, senior NHS executives, the general public who they've never kind of done before. And if they are, how can they get past that a little bit?
So I think it is fine to ask people to go to the edge of their comfort zone and a little bit beyond. The thing to be aware of is what your comfort zone is and what's their comfort zone. That's important. You also need to be, the more you're taking people outside their comfort zone, the more confident you should be in your, I suppose it's charisma in a way, but in your leadership. So a facilitator isn't just a passive thing, it is about leading. So I know someone who wasn't a strong facilitator, who worked with consultants, medical consultants, and she wanted them to do things with crayons. And they were like, my time's really important. I do stuff that, I save lives, man. I'm that important. Why am I behaving like a 2-year-old here? So I think you could imagine a way where you could get crayons them to use crayons. But you'd have to think, why are you getting them to use crayons? Yeah. Is it novelty for the sake of novelty?
Is it because you had crayons in the filing cabinet you've not used?
Exactly. Yeah. So I do think you can get people to do some pretty weird stuff. I did a conference on knowledge exchange, and I'll tell you about this again because it was like the Manhattan Project for interactive conferences. It nearly killed me. This is the conference where I had the 2-meter beach ball. Oh, yeah. But on the first day, we came up with 8 fundamental principles of co-design, of knowledge exchange. Then we had a rousy night out, deliberately, which I'll tell you, there was a good reason for that, a panel with in a deliberately small space, and we paid for 3 glasses of champagne for everyone. And it was raucous, an amazing panel, the best panel I've ever done. The next morning, we had drinks set out, and we had tea. And one stripe of the tea caddy was Alka-Seltzers, because we knew people would be out on the wrestle. But we got people in a big empty space, 40-metre square space, quadruple height room, to work with a choir master to sing and dance the principles that we came up with on the first day. And I had a squeaky bum doing that, because that was challenging.
That's on the edge.
Ken, you would be terrified by that.
I would hate that. But there's a sense also that once you get a few people doing it, people tend to follow the crowd, don't there? There's a bit of sheep. There's a bit of sheep in all of us, isn't there? That you.
But the guy who did it, because he didn't know the principles until 8 o'clock at night, and then at 9 in the morning he had to get us together, and he got us making sounds. He got us starting to sing, and then he got us. He did it really well. He was on top of his game. He was really nervous. So was I, but it actually came off really well. And the function of doing that is we had groups, because they'd spent 20, 25 minutes thinking about how they could sing and dance to this principle. They really had thought about the principle. They really bought into, this is our principle. And I can't remember them now. One of them was have KPIs you can believe in. And KPIs are really useful if you believe in them. If you don't, waste of time. And while they were doing this singing and dancing, it was a big like a sports or performance space. This wall folded back, and there were these physical spaces for each of these 8 principles were revealed as they were singing and dancing. It was amazing, but you can, if it's done well, you can get people quite a long way out of their comfort zone. But the further you're taking them, the more risk you're taking, and also the more competent you need to be as a facilitator.
Yeah, and I think 100% agree with that. Knowing that I've tested out some things in the past year and a half that have been a little bit kind of trying to push people, what I learned was generally people will have a go, providing, as you say, that you can that you can explain it in a confident way, and generally always having your mind ready the answer to the question, why we're doing this.
Yes.
And if you can do that really quickly, say exactly why it's this, people are pretty much willing to have a go at stuff.
Yeah.
And actually it then becomes much more memorable for them because they've done an interaction they're not used to, and it sticks in the mind much more.
And as facilitator or leader or shepherd or whatever you want to call it, you've got to be prepared to go and do it yourself if you're going to ask everyone else to. So if you're going to sing and dance, then you better be prepared to, even if you're not a good singer and dancer, to be going all in, just like your karaoke performance from earlier.
We know Leon is a singer now, so
we've heard it. And I think you've got to, if you're going to ask people to go far, you've got to be all in, haven't you? I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And that having a good reason to do it, having the rationale that stands up rather than, well, we're having a bit of fun. The kind of super rational people, which may be the people who are less likely to throw themselves into it, that will help them. That step into, okay, there's a good reason for this, and then you do it. And yet, examples. I would say throughout, if you want someone to do something, show them what you mean in an example. Just makes it easier. Just takes a load of questions, a load of stress, a load of uncertainty out of the way. It does mean you need to prepare those examples.
Yeah, I'm delivering something. I've just realised I shouldn't time date this podcast. However, delivering an event with some job centre customers at some point, and relatively simple things have been designed, but my intention is when I show it to get my felt tip pen and show them exactly what I mean when I do this and do my live version, so they can kind of understand it. So exactly that. Describing something's great. Visually show me what you mean. I'm totally on board.
And what you can do sometimes if you have time is, so if you show an example, people think that's the right way to do it.
Absolutely.
So if you have 3 examples that are really deliberately different, you'll establish a kind of solution space, and people will be more likely to feel comfortable, like, oh yeah, I'm quite visual, I'll do it quite visually, where someone else will be writing, another one will be like weird or whatever. They like fold this up into an aeroplane and throw it around or whatever. But people tend to, if you show them one example, they tend to respond like that one example. Yeah. But if you show them a few that are deliberately different, it gives the participants more ideas for how they could respond, and maybe one of those responses will be closer to the way they would naturally respond, or most comfortable responding.
I'm happy for any type of input here.
Yes.
Ultimately, it's about getting you sharing. So awesome. What I'd like to do, because I'm again wanting to kind of squeeze in as much as we can, I think if we can really, really quickly, a couple of bullet points, touch on the after the event. And the reason I'm saying really quickly is I think we've also done that throughout the podcast anyway. So basically, you've nailed the prep, you've nailed the event, and now it's about harnessing that kind of energy, enthusiasm, and commitment. So I think one of the things that you've kind of already said as a great idea is be able to share something really, really soon, so that they kind of, with an acknowledgement of your thanks and your gratitude for people being part of something and giving their time, and being able to do that as soon as possible from that event, I think is a really kind of key one for what's next. Is there anything else kind of big, kind of vital things you'd say?
Document the ideas and share those ideas. So it shows that you value what people did. So the kind of group picture at the end, that's great to share on the day, and people like it. But to have a report really quite quickly, maybe just good pictures of what the outcomes were, and sharing that, it shows that you've taken notice and you've taken seriously what they've said. It hasn't been. I did an event once for the Scottish Government, and they decided what they were going to do in a meeting literally at the end of the event. So they weren't interested in the outcome. They were interested in there being a workshop to discuss. But there was a workshop, and it was really interesting. It was about sites of democratic engagement. But the minute it stopped, they had a little committee meeting and they decided what they were going to do, and they didn't really look at what was around them. So I never worked with them again. Wow. That was it. They were, it was a bit dramatic, but they were dead to me because one of the things about I can work with who I want to work with, but so showing
you choose TaAF. Imagine that.
You guys are great to work with. So much room for improvement. It's wonderful.
There it is. He's been waiting an hour for that. He got it in.
Properly valuing people's contribution and showing that you value it. Also, and just on that point, I went to an event where they were probably about 6 months ago, where they were tweeting people's comments throughout the course of the day. So not just the facilitators or the speakers, but in the discussion groups, they kind of collected everyone's Twitter handles before the event and were, Ken Master said this and Leon said that, and that was really interesting, and you felt really valued. Like the thing that I said was captured.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was a nice way to do it.
It's good, and the tweeting in events, that the balance between being in the event and being the event actually being a sphere that's larger than the physical space, that's really interesting. Discussion for another time, maybe. The other thing is to be able to say what's happened next. So at the end of it, you say, thank you for this. This is going to form part of this process, and we're going to report back to you within a week, but then we're going to whatever it is. So people feel like you manage their expectations, and that something's going to happen as a result of it. This is going to inform this, and we'll tell you how, all that stuff. So they feel like they've worked hard. Mostly when you finish a workshop, you're pretty tired. But if they're happy and it's clear what process they're part of, that is a good reward for people, I think.
Brilliant. So I think we've created 7 podcasts for the future there. Luckily, Leon's got loads of time free for TaAF.
Yeah, I'm just bumping around. I'm bored.
We have so much room for improvement. He's now committed himself to loads of sharing, learning podcasts with us. So what I would like to do now is firstly quickly review the success factors that we talked about at the start. So we talked about it would be good to have some fun. I mean, I did. I can't speak on your behalf, Leon.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Look at that. That was enthusiasm gone miles then, wasn't it? Yeah.
I've been told I must say yes at this point. And then a little bit of remembering the TaAF journey. I think we've drawn out examples of our journey, and actually it's the journey that we're still on. So I think we've certainly talked about that kind of big event we've done. Talked a little bit around some of the things that Leon was involved in at the start, which I'm now trying to apply in a lot of the work, at least that I do, and how that's shaping a lot of what we do. And actually, if you want to see more around the kind of TaAF journey and Leon's input, if you go to the Together and Active Future webpage and look at our Pathfinder document, there's a full section in there about our approach to creative engagement and the work that we've done with Leon in there to give you a little bit more info. So, as we always do, we congratulate ourselves on nailing success factors. So all it leaves now to do is a little bit of... we'll hand over to Leon for the final thoughts. But what I would like to do is, so firstly, if you would like to find out more about Leon, And I really would advise you to do that. I think the work that Leon's done with us and the time and the commitment that we've had with him has been massively beneficial and helpful. It's literally changed the way I work fundamentally in what I do. I couldn't now go back to doing some of that stuff, and I mean that in a massively positive and complimentary way. So I would advise people, if they can do, to link in with Leon and his team. You can find them on, if you Google Imagination Lancaster, you'll be able to find links there to Leon, his team. I would also advise you to look at some of the leapfrog tools that Leon and his team have developed over time based on all their interactions with all these people that Leon has talked about. There's loads of really helpful tools, activities, templates, some great materials on there that can help you in delivering an event. You're also on Twitter, so let me get this right. I don't know if do you know you're on Twitter? Yeah, you're an active tweeter. So you can find Leon at Cruickshank. So that is at CRUICKSH, and you can find Leon on there. So basically, take some time and find out more about Leon and the team.
And you mentioned your book earlier. If people want to find your book, how do they do that?
Oh, it's on Amazon. It's called Open Design and Innovation, Facilitating Creativity in Everyone.
Still awaiting our free signed copy.
I tell you what, I'll give you a copy if you promise to read it all.
Deal.
I'll read it all.
All right, wicked. So just before we pass over to Leon, then what I'd like to do is just say thank you to Leon firstly for a really, really interesting podcast. Enjoyed it, Ken?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you again. And I think, if there's anything I'd take away from today for me from the discussion, it's just this sense of being person-centred and thinking about how it impacts on everyone who's involved.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Right, so thank you for everybody who has listened, probably up to 7, 8 now? Hundreds, thousands, millions, depending on when you listen to it. Thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, please feel free to share the link, subscribe to the podcast, get notified on future podcasts that we will share.
At TaAF Talks.
At TaAF Talks, thank you. Follow us on Twitter at TaAF Talks. Tweet away and have your say. Ooh, I like that. I've just developed that live. Brilliant. Have your say and tweet away. So I'll finish self-congratulating me now. And I will hand over to Leon for the final word.
Thank you both. I've had a great time today. Thanks for the invite. I've had a great time working on TaAF as well. It's a brilliant project. So the takeaway is agree a common goal, empathise with your participants, and have fun.